Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Charlene and today I'm going to be talking about my best books of the spring quarter and also some of the books that I am planning to get to in the summer. So I mentioned, I think towards the end of last year, that I wanted to switch over to doing quarterly wrap-ups because it just works better for me. Some months I read enough books to warrant a full monthly wrap-up and some months I don't. So I figured this might balance things out a little bit more if I have a similar number of books to talk about each quarter. But I've also realized recently that there are some books that I'm just not excited to talk about. Usually because they're not books that I enjoyed as much, but they're still books that I read, so I feel like I should talk about them, and then it's like 15 books that I have to talk about in one wrap-up. So I decided I'm going to change things up, and I'm just going to talk about the top 5 books that I read each quarter, so I can really spend time focusing on the books that I really enjoyed and that I really want to recommend. I don't know if this will be the case with every quarter, but at least some quarters I will also have some honorable mentions. For the most part, these are going to be books that fall into 3 different categories. The first are books that I reread. Typically, I only reread books that I really enjoyed, so it doesn't make sense to go on a long tangent about why I liked the book so much when it's one that I already read before. I'd rather spend more time talking about the books that I just read rather than talking about the books that I've read multiple times. The second are nonfiction. Some nonfiction might make it into the top 5 if I have enough to talk about, but some nonfiction I can tell you generally what the book is about, and that's enough for me to recommend it. So unless it's one that I have a lot to say about, it will probably go in the honorable mentions. And the third and final one are books that almost made it into my top 5. Like, I was debating between 2 or 3 different books as to which one was going to make it into the top 5 and which ones weren't. And the ones that didn't make it, I will go ahead and mention as an honorable mention, so I can still say I do recommend them. They were close, and on another day I might have picked a different book. But for that particular day when I was filming, I decided it didn't make it into the top 5. And then at least for the summer, possibly even after the summer, I'm going to start doing a seasonal TBR where I go over some of the books that I'm planning to read over the next 3 months. Again, rather than doing a monthly TBR, because right now I'm cutting back to about 1 video every other week. And so with only 2 or 3 videos per month, it doesn't make sense for one of those videos to be a TBR video every single month. So I hope that clarifies everything. Now let's go ahead and get into the wrap-up, and the first thing we're going to start with are my stats for the quarter. And I don't talk about a lot of stats per quarter. I will go into more of them at the end of the year, but for the quarter I like to talk about how many books I read each month, how many books I read by genre, by age category, and by star rating. And I will have some graphics up here that you guys can see while I'm going over this, but breaking it down by month, I read 5 books in the month of March, 3 books in the month of April, and 6 books in the month of May. So honestly, this year I've stayed fairly consistent. I read 6 books in January, 6 in February. April was kind of the one that dipped a bit. And I don't remember why April was such a slow reading month. Oh, I kind of do. I was spending a lot of time trying to get caught up on books that I should have already read. And so I think it was a lot of the books I was having to read were books that I felt like I had to read rather than books that I was picking up just because I wanted to read them. So I think that was part of the reason why April was a bit slumpy. The beginning of May was too, but clearly the end of May made up for it. Then if we break it down by genre, I'm only including the genres that I actually read books from, not every genre I read. But I read 5 classics, 3 fantasy, 2 historical fiction, 1 mystery, 2 nonfiction, and 1 sci-fi. I am still very surprised and kind of disappointed with myself that fantasy is still not my top genre. Almost every year, fantasy is easily my most read genre, and this is the second quarter in a row that fantasy is not number 1. And the fact that I have read 5 classics this quarter is very surprising. Then if we break it down by age category, I read 9 adult books, 3 YA, and 2 children's books. And I mostly consider it a children's book if it's short enough, because to me children's books are like picture books and the short chapter books. The thing that surprises me the most with this one is that I have yet to read a single middle grade book this year. I've read a few children's books. Obviously, I've read these two. I might have read one other, but I have read not a single middle grade this year. And normally it's like adult is number 1, middle grade is number 2, and YA is number 3. So it's very strange that there is not a single middle grade book on this list. Then if we break it down by star ratings for the quarter, I am happy to say I had no DNFs this quarter and no ratings between 1 star and 2.5. I did have 1 3-star, then I had 3 3.5s, 3 4-stars, 3 4.5s, and 4 5-stars. So I'm fairly happy with that. 3.5 isn't terrible. 3.5 for me is kind of dipping a little bit below I really liked this into I liked it, it was good, but not something that's necessarily going to be super memorable for me. 3-star is definitely in that realm of it's probably not going to be that memorable, but it was still good. So thankfully I had none below that, because for me that starts dipping into more of I did not care for this book. Alright, so now we can get into my top books of the quarter. And we are going to start with the honorable mentions because I do have 3 of them. The first one was a reread, and that is The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. And this one I read, I think, about 10 years ago. And at the time that I read it, instantly it was like, this is now my favorite classic of all time. And it has just held that spot. I hadn't read a book since that I thought actually topped my experience of reading this one. And I'd been wanting to reread it for years. Finally reread it this spring with Dia and Tiffany and Lauren. Lauren doesn't have a channel, but the 4 of us did read it together. I was very much the last one done with this because I got caught up in all of the other books that I needed to read. But I did finally get it finished. And I will say it is definitely still one of my top classics of all time. But reading it now, already knowing the story, which is what I did when I read Les Mis, which is also in my top 5, I feel like this one might actually get bumped down to number 2. Les Mis might actually take the top spot now. I'm not 100% certain on that, but that's what I'm leaning towards. Because the hard part I had with Les Mis was the fact that I did already know so much of the story from having listened to the musical and watched the musical several times. And so there were things in the book that weren't in the musical because, time constraints. But I still knew the bulk of the story. And so a lot of it wasn't new to me. And I felt like if I hadn't already known the story, it probably would have gone to number 1. But because I already knew the story, it didn't have the same effect as it would have had if I didn't know it ahead of time. And now rereading this one, I did know the story ahead of time. And so I think Les Mis may actually top this one. It is still definitely in my top 5. It is probably, I would probably consider it my second favorite classic. It's possible as time goes on, I might change my mind on that and it might move somewhere else in the top 5 list, but I don't really see it leaving the top 5. Then the second book I'm listing as an honorable mention is a nonfiction, and that is Stop Calling Me Beautiful by Felicia Masonheimer. I read this one as part of Keisha's Revive Book Club. I believe this was the pick in March, and I really enjoyed this book. I read Every Woman a Theologian by her when the Revive Book Club read that one in, I think it was November of 2023 that they read that one. Really enjoyed that book too. And this one is more focused on the fact that so many women's conferences and women's Bible studies and things like that are focused on, God loves you as you are, you're enough, you're great, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, but then they don't tell you what to do with that. Or what God accepting you as part of his family actually means for your life. And so she goes into a lot of the things that she has learned along the way, and the way that we can apply the scripture to our lives today, and what being a child of God means and looks like. So if you haven't picked this one up, I would definitely recommend it. And then the last book that made it on the honorable mention list is one that I was debating between this and one other book as to which one was going to be in the number 5 spot. And ultimately I picked a different book, but I do still want to mention this one because it was a very close contender, and that is Orange Volume 2 by Ichigo Takano. This is the second and final volume as far as the main storyline of the Orange series. And this is a manga, It's set in a high school where the main character ends up receiving a letter from herself 10 years in the future telling her that a new boy who's going to be starting at the school is going to suffer a terrible fate. And she's telling her to do some things differently in hopes of saving him from what's coming. We're not told exactly what happens to him in the very beginning. It takes a while for all of that to unfold, but this book very much picks up where the last volume left off. Technically, I guess there's 5 volumes in total, either 5 or 6. The first 3 are in volume 1, and the last 2 or 3 are in this volume. I did really like how this story wrapped up. The only reason why I didn't rate this volume as highly as the first volume is because there were things at the very beginning of this volume that were just kind of rough. And it doesn't surprise me that it was, with what we learned at the very end of volume 1. But it was a little bit rough starting off compared to the first volume. So I didn't rate it quite as high, but I did still really enjoy it, and I would recommend the series. All right, so now we're going to move on to my top 5 books of the spring quarter. And the one that was in the number 5 spot, the one I was debating on, is The Book Jumper by Mechtil Glezer. This is a YA, I guess, kind of portal fantasy book. It was originally published in German, and as far as I am aware, this and The Forgotten Book are the only ones by her that have been translated into English. I'm hoping eventually they translate some of her other books, but so far there's only 2. But in this book, we are following, I don't remember her name, Amy. Amy and her mom, who have been living in Germany, but they leave Germany to go on holiday, and they go back to her mother's home in Scotland. She left there when she was, I think, 18 or 19, somewhere in there, and hasn't been back since. But now she's going back, and when they arrive there, Amy learns that her family and another family on this island have the ability to jump into books. And their job is basically to make sure that things are going smoothly in the books, to make sure nothing has changed. Because if things get off track in the book or they change in the book, they will change in every copy of the book. And so then they have to go through and put things right so that the story can continue going the way it was supposed to. The part that I liked about this book the most was all of the book jumping. I loved getting to see the book world through Amy's eyes. Amy definitely does a lot of traveling within the book world, more than it sounds like the other people on the island do. So the things that she sees, the characters she interacts with, all the places she goes, it was so interesting. And then we also end up with a bit of a mystery in this book because there are things going wrong in the book world that just don't make sense as to why they're going wrong. There are major ideas being stolen from the books. There is a fictional character towards the very beginning who turns up dead. All sorts of things going on. They have no idea why they're happening, who's behind them. And so there's a bit of a mystery that they're trying to figure out alongside us just getting to see this book world in general. So all of that I thoroughly enjoyed. It was so much fun. I was so immersed in it. However, the one part of this book that I didn't think was done as well was the depth of the characters. It was almost like some of the things we were being told with the characters gave the idea that there is more to these characters than we know, but the book didn't delve into it. It would give us a small piece of information and then just move on. And I wanted to know more about these characters than what we got. So that was the one downside to this. The world, the mystery, all the book jumping, all of that was really well done. I just wish there would have been a little bit better character work. But I don't know for sure. I feel like this was her first published novel. If it wasn't, I will correct it somewhere on the screen. But I think this was her first published novel. And I don't remember having that issue when I read The Forgotten Book by her 2 years ago. So hopefully that's just a case with this book. But it was still a really good story and I would still recommend it. Then in the number 4 spot, we have A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventure by Angela Bell. And this one I actually buddy read with Anne from In Search of Wonder. The Book Jumper, I forgot to mention, was one of my picks for my book club called the Distant Lands Book Club. I believe that was our pick for April. But this one I read, I think I buddy read this one with Anne in April also. But this is a historical fiction book that has a slight steampunk feel to it. And in this book, we're following Clara, who has recently broken off an engagement. We're not given the specifics as to why, but ever since their engagement was broken off, her family has had to deal with people coming into their house, appearing to be innocent, but they're actually there to spy on the family, having been hired by her ex-fiance. And they're trying to find proof that her family is insane and get them all put in an institution, I guess. Then her grandfather, Drosselmeyer, hires a new apprentice, doesn't know anything about him except what the man has told him, and this immediately sends off alarm bells in Clara's mind. But Drosselmeyer trusts him, and then out of the blue, Drosselmeyer hops onto a clockwork owl and takes off for mainland Europe. And so Clara, his new apprentice Arthur, and her mother all set off on a scavenger hunt that he has set up for them across different parts of Europe, in order to try to find and catch up to him, while he has plans of his own with this whole scavenger hunt. Honestly, this book was so much fun. I loved the characters. I loved the romance in this book. It is a slow burn romance, but one of the things I've seen a lot in books I read that either have a strong romantic subplot or are romance books is that there is so much focus on the physical attraction. The ways that the character looks that attract the other person. And it's one of those where I'm like, I understand how there might be things about them physically that you notice at the very beginning. But eventually there has to be more to this relationship than just the way they look. And I see this even in Christian books, which is the part that bothers me the most. And the romance in this book that ends up developing is not at all based on looks. I don't even know if there's ever really a mention of their looks other than maybe, a character noticing like the other character's hair color or something like that. But it's something very trivial, and it's not something that they're attracted to. It's just something that they notice. And so I really loved the romance in this book. I thought it was very well written. There is a little bit of a thriller aspect because it eventually turns out that they are being followed. So I loved that part of the story. I loved all of the different relationships and how they developed, the faith elements that were in here. Honestly, the only thing I did not like about this book was the mother's obsession with animals. And I understand, seeing animals, wanting to protect them, not wanting them to be harmed. I get that. But this mother was so concerned about the animals that it basically did not matter how much it hindered their journey, this quest that they were on. If it endangered any of them in any way, she was going to protect these animals. And to me, it's like, at that point, you've gone too far. If you are willing to endanger your daughter in order to protect an animal, you've gone too far. I think if it had been handled a little bit differently, if it hadn't been quite so extreme, I wouldn't have had an issue with it. But there were just a number of times where it really made things difficult or put them in a more dangerous situation because she was so concerned about these animals instead of her own well-being or the well-being of those that she was traveling with. Other than that, really great book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And my battery's already low, so it said it was charged. It clearly lied to me. So I'm going to change the battery out, and I will be right back. Alright, then the book that I placed in the number 3 spot was Vera Wong's Guide to Snooping on a Dead Man by Jessie Q. Sutanto. This is the second book in the Vera Wong series, and it just came out in, I believe, April. This one I read on NetGalley, so I do not have a physical copy of it. But this book I really, really enjoyed. I wasn't sure how well I was going to enjoy it after reading the first book. I loved the first book. I gave it 5 stars. But sometimes with books, it's like the things you liked in the first book that were so endearing, when you read the second book, it's just, okay, it's more of the same. So I wasn't sure how all of that was going to go over, but I ended up really enjoying this book. So in this one, we are once again following Vera Wong as she stumbles onto a new mystery. She spots a young lady outside of the police station, and the girl looks nervous about going in, so she takes her back to her tea shop and starts asking her questions, and discovers that there is a man this girl knew who has seemingly disappeared. She doesn't know where he is. She doesn't know what happened to him. They weren't in a relationship or anything, but they were friends and she's concerned about him. And as Vera goes snooping, she discovers that he has died. Once again, the police have ruled it as a suicide, but she's not so sure. And so she starts digging into this mystery, interviewing people that he knew, and it turns out that this man may not be who everyone thought he was. And so in this one, just like in the first book, we are getting a variety of different characters who all may or may not have been involved in this man's death. And they all have secrets that they are wanting to keep close to themselves and they're not wanting to reveal. Were any of them actually guilty of what happened to him? You'll have to read to find out. But I will say that this book, once you get to the end, I'm not going to say what it is because that would be spoilery, but as you get to the end of the book, it really starts delving into a very hard topic. If you want to know what that is before you read it, I will have a link to my Goodreads review down in the description below, which is where I list all of the content you can find in the book. I do cover up some of the things with spoiler tags, but if you don't mind being spoiled because you want to know what's in the book, you can go check it out there and see what's in the book before you pick it up. But I really liked how she covered the topic, and I liked how the whole story ultimately wrapped up. I loved a lot of the new characters that we got to meet, especially the more we got to know them, the more I got attached to them. So the first book in this series I loved. This book I also thoroughly enjoyed, and considering where this book ends, I hope that's a clue as to what's going to happen in the next book, and if it is, I am so excited for it. Alright, then the book I put in my number 2 spot is Before the King by Heather Kaufman. This is the second book in the Women of the Ways series, and this one came out in January. I think there's only going to be 3 books in this series, but I'm not 100% certain about that, so I'm just calling it a series for now instead of a trilogy. The first book in this series was Up from Dust, which follows Martha of Bethany, whose brother and sister are Mary and Lazarus in the New Testament. That book I read last year, and I enjoyed it, but there were some things that just didn't really land as well for me. But Before the King follows Joanna, and we only really get about 2 or 3 verses in the Bible that tell us anything about her. But this follows her story from a very young age when they discover that her sister has an illness, and the family ultimately sends her away to live with an aunt, because if people knew that they had a child in their family who had this illness, it could look bad for the family. It could make it difficult for Joanna to get married in the future because every man is going to be worried that, well, if your sister had this illness, then our future children could have it. And this is very hard for Joanna, but she's only 7 or 8 at the time that her sister is sent away, so she has no say in this. But then we jump ahead to when she is, I think, 16 years old, and she is betrothed to a man that she really doesn't care for. She's very concerned about how this marriage is going to go because he seems more interested in her for what he will get from her after they are married in the sexual sense rather than anything else. So it makes her very uncomfortable, but she knows that this would be an advantageous marriage. Her father is very excited about it, so she has chosen to go ahead and go along with it. But then one day there is an accident and she is injured, and that changes the whole course of her life. And I won't say more than that to try not to go into spoilers, but I ended up really enjoying this book. Even though I know there are a lot of things in here that very likely may not have happened in Joanna's life or even the lives of some of the other people that she comes in contact with specifically, there is a really good chance that a lot of these things did happen to someone in this time. So just getting that insight into what life may have been like back then, what life may have been like for someone like Joanna, I thought it was all really well done. I really enjoyed my time reading this. And even if you read Up from Dust and, like me, thought it was good, but you didn't love it, I would still recommend checking this one out. And if you haven't started the series, in my opinion, you can start with either book. There is nothing from Up from Dust that shows up in this book, and there's nothing in this book that relates back to Up from Dust in any way, shape, or form. So these books can be read in any order. I would recommend this one more than Up from Dust myself, but you could read them in any order that you want. Alright, then the last book we're going to talk about in the wrap-up section is my top book of the quarter. And yes, there is part of me that feels like maybe this feels like my top book because it is one of my most recent reads. But there's another reason why I specifically put it in my number one spot, and that is Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. This was my May pick for the Distant Lands Book Club, and I loved this story. It definitely feels like in this first book that we are getting a lot of very basic information on these characters that we can then delve into more in future books. So I'm hoping that that will be the case. But even what we did get in this book, I really enjoyed. I loved so many of the characters. I loved their interactions, just learning about this world. And honestly, it was so nice to be back in an epic fantasy series. I realized when I picked up this book that apparently I have read little to no high fantasy, epic fantasy at all this year. And it was so nice to come back to that. And to give a brief summary of this book, we are following a young man named Wraith, who with his father is hunting on the other side of a river, which is technically where the Frey live. And the people in this world view the Frey as gods. As far as they know, they are immortal. They have abilities that these people known as runes don't have. And so to them, they are gods. And one of them shows up and says, "You can't be over here. You need to leave, and you need to leave all your weapons behind." His father refuses and pays the price for that refusal. And then, through different circumstances, the Frey ends up dying as well. And it brings about this revelation that the Frey are not immortal, that the Frey can be killed. And so it brings in the question of, are they actually gods? But then Wraith also becomes known as the God Killer. And so the Frey are seeking him out. He ends up taking refuge in this town, and there's other characters that we get to know there. So this is a really easy book to get into as far as fantasy books are concerned, especially high fantasy. But there is a little bit of this feeling of there's going to be a lot more to come. We're just introducing you to the world through these different characters' perspectives, and then we're really going to delve in later books. The main reason why I put this book in the number one spot is because as soon as I finished this book, I immediately ordered the second book. And I thought about seeing if my library apps or my library had the book already, but I realized I really should not read the second book until I had the live stream discussion on this one, so I haven't started it yet, but there's a really good chance when it gets here, I will pick it up soon after. Alright, so those are my top books of the spring quarter. Overall, it was a really good quarter. I think, honestly, May was probably the weakest of the 3 months, because I think most of the books that month were between 3 and 4 stars, except for Age of Myth. It very easily went to the top of my list for May, which is another reason why I feel like maybe that's why it went to my top spot, because it stood out for all of the other books I read in May, but it was still a really good book. And honestly, a lot of the top 5 could be put in a different order if you ask me on a different day. So take the order with a grain of salt, but that's where I placed them for today. Alright, so now we're going to get on to the second part of this video, which is my TBR for the summer. And I have to say, I am looking forward to summer because that means iced coffee season. And I do like hot coffee, but I've been trying to figure out over the last several months, maybe a year or two, why it is that I seem to go through spells where I will drink a lot of coffee and almost no tea, and other times where I drink a ton of tea and almost no coffee. I do call this channel Coffee in a Book, but I do drink a fair amount of tea as well. And I think I may have finally landed on the reason, and that's because in the fall and winter when it's cooling down, I like the warmer drinks, and I typically like hot tea more than I like hot coffee. But in the spring and summer when it starts warming up, and I get to go to the cold drinks, I typically like iced coffee more than iced tea. So I think that's why there's this fluctuation between do I drink more coffee or do I drink more tea? Because there are times, especially in the fall and winter, where I feel like calling my channel Coffee in a Book is a lie because I'm drinking more tea. But we are very much getting into the season where I will be drinking coffee a lot more often. So it is not a lie at this point. Alright, so the way that I'm going to talk about the books on my TBR for the summer is I do have a few that are divided up by specific months because of book clubs, read-alongs, things like that. And then I have a few others that I'm going to mention that I would really like to prioritize this summer. I don't know if I will get to them, but they are ones that I would really like to prioritize. So they will be mentioned later because I could read them at any point. But the two book club / read-alongs that I am going to mention, because they are going on every single month, are my book club, which is Distant Lands Book Club, and also the Jane Austen read-along that I am doing with Anne from In Search of Wonder this year. And as always, links to my book club are down in the description below. There is an Instagram page where I make announcements. We also have a Fable page where we have our discussions, and Fable breaks it down chapter by chapter, so you can discuss it and read the comments through the parts that you have actually read, and not get spoiled for later things. And I will also have a link down in the description below for the graphic for our Jane Austen read-along, in case you haven't gotten that already, so you know what books are coming up. And the book for my book club for June is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lin Tan. And this one is an Asian-inspired fantasy. I know the main character is going on a quest to learn something about her mother or to find her mother. There is a romance in here, but from what I've been able to tell, it is a bit of a smaller part of the plot, but also it is a clean romance. And I heard good things about this one from both Chantel and Dia, so I'm really hoping we all enjoy this one. And my co-host for June is Maddie from This Bookish Cottage, so she and I will be doing a live stream at the end of June, beginning of July on this book, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And I will have announcements for exactly what date the live stream is going to happen. We haven't decided that yet at the time of filming, so I don't know, but when I do know, I will make the announcement here. And then for the Jane Austen read-along, which is our celebration of Jane Austen's 250th birthday, which will happen in December of this year, our pick for June is Mansfield Park. And this is one of two novels by Jane Austen that I know nothing about. I know the play Lover's Vows shows up because we just read that one in May. But other than that, I know nothing about the plot in this book. So I'm really looking forward to getting to this one. Then also in June, there is an additional book that I'm going to try to get to. I mean, there are different book clubs that I would like to participate in. I just don't know how many I'm going to get to. But this one I'm going to mention in particular because June is the first month that it is taking place. And that is Chrissy's Purple Pages book club that she is starting this month. And her pick for June is Hava by Tosca Lee. I've read Iscariot by her, but that is the only biblical fiction book I have read by Tosca Lee. And I really enjoyed that one. So I'm really hoping I enjoy Hava as well. And as far as book clubs and all of that, this is definitely my top priority for the month. Outside of the other two that I already mentioned, because I am part of those and I need to make sure I read those books. And all I really know about Hava is this is the story of Eve, as far as I understand. I have definitely never read any biblical fiction that takes place that far in the past. So I am really curious to read this one and see how she covers all of that. Then we'll move on to July. So the Distant Lands Book Club pick for that month is Come Back to Me by Jodi Headland. This is book 1 in the Waters of Time series, and I believe this is an adult sci-fi, and it involves time travel. In this book, the main character has a sister with a genetic disease that actually took her mother's life. And through her father's studies, he ends up falling into a coma. He drank a vial of water that seems to have trace residue from the Tree of Life, and the clues that he leaves behind seem to suggest that he has traveled in time. And the main character thinks this is crazy until she tests his theories and ends up back in the Middle Ages. She ends up being rescued by a knight who promises her protection as his wife. And the more time she spends there, the more that she wants to stay there and stay with him. But she also needs to get back to heal her sister. And so she kind of has to decide, which route does she want to take? Can she even get back? And if she does, then she would probably never see him again. This one, as you can probably guess by the fact I said Tree of Life, is a Christian sci-fi. And it's one that I've been interested in for a while. I don't always do romance, but the fact that there is time travel involved in this makes me a lot more intrigued. And I'm trying with the books I pick for the book club to pick a variety of different types of books within each genre. So I knew I wanted a time travel book somewhere in the books that we read this year. And so this is the one that I ultimately decided to go with. And my co-host for July is going to be Cheryl from Candlewick Library. And I'm so excited that I now have the opportunity to read this book with her and discuss it with her. Again, our live stream for this one will be towards the end of July, beginning of August. I will make an announcement of the exact date sometime in July, but all of my live streams are typically at the very end of one month or the very beginning of the next, just kind of depending on how the dates fall and what works for me and the co-host. And then for the Jane Austen readathon, the book that we're reading in July, because we wanted to make sure we had a Jane Austen book in July for Jane Austen July, we are going to be reading Emma. And this one, I do know the story. I've read a modern retelling of this book, which felt very much like he just picked up Emma from the past, popped it in the future, and changed a couple things to make it fit and said, there, new story. Not really a new story at that point, but that's what it felt like. I've also read a graphic novel adaptation of this. I have seen Clueless, which is based on this book, and I've seen I believe it's the 2020 adaptation. So I do know the story fairly well. Now, the two versions that I read of this, I didn't care for it. I didn't like the character of Emma, so I didn't enjoy most of the story. Then when I watched the two movie adaptations, or retellings, I actually ended up really enjoying them. So I'm hoping, having had so much exposure to Emma already, that I will actually enjoy this book. We will see, but I'm hoping. Alright, then on to August, and I don't own any of these books at this point, so I'll just have to pop images up here. But the pick for the Distant Lands Book Club for August is Enhanced by Candace Cade. This is a YA Christian dystopian in a world where most people have had their genetics enhanced somehow, and there are a few people who have not been enhanced, and they are highly sought after. I can't remember now if it's because they want their genetics, or if it's more like it's illegal, but it's one or the other. Honestly, I hear about a lot of Enclave Publishing's books, and they all sound really good. So when I was looking for a dystopian for the book club, this is the one that I decided to go ahead and go with. Yes, you will notice I have two sci-fi back-to-back, and no, that was not originally my intent, but one of my co-hosts really wanted to read and discuss one of the books, but was not available in the month that I had it assigned, so I decided to accommodate and swap a couple things around. So they're not quite in the order that I scheduled them, but you know what, I'm okay with having a couple sci-fi back-to-back, because I have not read much sci-fi this year. And actually, I haven't read a lot of sci-fi in recent years, period. So it's not really a bad thing that I'm having to read two of them that close together. Maybe it'll get me back into more sci-fi. Hey guys, editing Charlene here, because I just realized I forgot to mention my co-host for August. My co-host is Kelly from Bookish Kelly. She does have a newer channel on here, so if you haven't checked her out, I would highly recommend that you do. But I'm very excited to be reading this book with her. And again, our live stream will be towards the end of August, beginning of September. So look forward to seeing you all there. And then for the Jane Austen read-along, we actually have three options for August. The first one is Prayers of Jane Austen. The second is Poetry of Jane Austen. And the third is Letters of Jane Austen. And I know at least two, if not all three of these are available on Project Gutenberg. I feel like when I looked late last year, one of them wasn't available and I don't remember which one. But you can read all three of these. You can just pick out one or two of them to read. However many you want to read is fine. I'm going to try to read all three of them. I could be wrong, but I don't feel like any of them are overly long. But I feel like they would also be easier to get through because it's prayers, it's letters, it's poems. For me, those are typically easier things to read through. So I will try to get to all of them. If I can only get to one, I would probably try to get to her poetry. But I'm going to try to read all three. Alright, then I have a couple other books that I would really like to try to get to this summer. I don't know if I'm going to get to them, but I'm going to try. And the first one is Murder at the Mena House by Erica Ruth Neubauer, or Neubauer, or however you say it. Neubauer would be the German pronunciation, but if you Americanize it, it might be Neubauer. But this is the first book in the Jane Wonderly mystery series, which, as far as I'm aware, is still ongoing. There's currently 6 books out, but this book came out in 2021. So I'm pretty sure the most recent book just came out this year or is coming out later this year. So the series is still going as far as I'm aware. But this takes place in the 1920s in Egypt, which immediately piqued my interest. But I saved this in one of my library apps years ago, and for some reason have still not picked it up. So I did realize at one point that it seems to take place in the summer. I think it takes place in August, but I could be wrong. So this just seems like the perfect time to pick it up. And no, I didn't do this for any of the other books I talked about, but I am going to read the first paragraph of this one because it was reading the first paragraph of this and also the rest of the first chapter that made me go, no, I want to read this book. When selecting an exotic location for travel, it's advisable to choose one where the air isn't trying to kill you. I would try to remember that for next time. So that line just made me laugh. It's a great opening line to the book, and reading through the first chapter, I feel like that humor shows up throughout. So I'm hoping that this is one I really enjoy. As far as I know, it's a murder mystery. It's in Egypt in the 1920s, and that's about all I know. But it's one that just sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. So I am going to try to get to that one this summer. And then the other book that I'm going to try to get to, because I haven't gotten to any of his books this year, is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. I'm wanting to read this one because I know apparently there are things in here that if you read this book first and then read Tress of the Emerald Sea, there are things in Tress that you will understand that you wouldn't get if you haven't read this. So since I already want to read this one, I'm going to go ahead and read this one, and then sometime after I'm done with it, I will pick up Tress. I do not have any particular schedule or timeline for this. It's just kind of whenever I pick them up. But these are my next two priorities, this one and Tress, so I'm going to try to at least get to this one this summer. If I could get to Tress as well, that would be great, but I at least want to get to this one. And yes, I am probably one of the very few people who has not gotten to Tress yet, but I'm hoping to get to it this year. I don't want to say I'm going to, because then it never happens. So I'm hoping to get to it this year. And I don't know a whole lot about this, except it's another high fantasy. It's by Brandon Sanderson, and that's really all I know. And Hoyt is in it. That's about all I know. So that's all I have for you guys for today. I did enjoy a lot of the books that I read this quarter, but the ones I talked about are the ones that I enjoyed the most. If you read any of the books that I talked about, let me know what you thought about them, especially the books that I have coming up. But also if you read any of the books that were in my top 5, feel free to let me know your thoughts on them. Also let me know what were some of your top books from the last 3 months, and what is one book in particular that you would really like to get to this summer. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you peace. I'll see you later.